This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Hayden Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Hayden's iPhone, Seth Tower Hurd.
All right, so we promised you a show about conflict. Another one of those 100% universal, everybody's going to have it type of things. My name is Seth Tower.
Very much so.
Yes, very much so. He's Hayden Shaw. He's helped over 30,000 managers at some of the biggest companies in America and globally, actually, as well. My name is Seth Tower Hurd, and this is something I think I said in the last episode. Probably one of the top things I would take a do-over on my career about is I probably wouldn't, I'm 100% sure I wouldn't handle conflict in the same way.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. I went from probably being too nice and doing whatever anybody told me to do. Cause like I grew up on a farm and it's like, well, you gotta, if somebody tells you to, scoop a wagon of manure, then you do it. Right. It doesn't matter what they're paying you. It doesn't matter. Just you do it. Okay. And then I went from realizing.
Stop right there.
Yes.
Completely off topic, but manure. My uncle, my dad grew up on a farm, was actually the last child born in the farmhouse itself and not in the hospital. So we would go to my grandparents, and we probably ended up spending about 30 days a year there all total. Anyway, we loved, because we were younger boys. The only thing we could help with on the farm was manure because it was light. We couldn't really shovel a full scoop shovel of a shelled corn. We couldn't throw hay. But we could shovel manure from the time we were elementary school aged on. So my uncle would leave a barn literally 6 inches deep. All the cows would have anklets of poop until we got there because we loved to shower. When we put on his boots, throw it all in a manure spreader that didn't even have rubber wheels. They were still steel tread wheels. And we'd throw that. And it was such a satisfying thing because we could help. And because manure is so satisfying because you can watch it, you can actually have a deep sense of satisfaction because it flings it all over a field. And so my uncle thought we were the craziest people in the world because we asked him to hold the manure for us until we got there.
And that's also a good metaphor because I spent the first 3 or 4 years of my career standing behind that wagon. And then I spent 6 years of my career yelling at people because I'd stood behind the wagon.
There we go. Well, I guess it ties to conflict, does it not?
Okay, so what do we do here?
Yeah, we had talked in the last episode, and we promised people we'd talk about conflict, and Seth and I have made us not a resolution. That would mean we plan to do it, but at least we've decided that we probably ought to remember what we promised, what we're going to do in other episodes. Anyway, we promise you we go into more depth on this. And just a quick review. A guy named Thomas Gilman has a famous set of categories, and Seth would be a sturdy battler. That's a person that has no trouble moving forward for what they want. And their opposite would be the avoider, the person that just goes, let me roll up in a ball and ride this one out. Or an accommodator, who would be a person that says, like you did earlier, I grew up on a farm and nice people don't ask for what they want. If you want me to stand behind a manure, if you want me to scoop manure, or better yet, Seth, to what you just said, stand behind the manure spreader for 3 years, that's what I'll do. And then you've got people who are compromisers. And they look at life as, if I get a little and you get a little, that's the best you can expect in the real world. And lastly, there are people who, he said, collaborate, where they insist on a win for themselves and insist on a win for the other person. Okay.
We talked about politics before, which, like I said, that if I would have got that at 27 or 28, and I'm 35 now, I think it would have changed everything. I just don't have a lot to add here because I would have done it differently almost every time. And I even right now.
No, you got a lot to add. What would you have done differently?
What would I have done differently? I would have quit a couple jobs sooner when I was younger. Things that like really truly did cross over into illegalities, forcing me to attend an event with Chick-fil-A without telling me there was Chick-fil-A there, and I wound up in the emergency room. I'm allergic to peanut oil, so
no, he's not just allergic to peanut oil. He had to go to the hospital once because they switched the soap at the gym.
Oh yeah,
and after he got done swimming, there was now coconut.
There was coconut soap, yeah.
Coconut scent in the soap at the gym, and he had to go to the hospital. So this man is off the charts.
Yeah, so I had a boss lie to me and say that it wasn't going to be there, and I mean that's like legit lawsuit, type of material right there. Basically, I actually had a company situation one time.
That's the stuff of mystery stories. Sorry, I read a lot of mysteries, and I just read one on the road this week, and there's a plot right there. How do I get rid of my my arch nemesis at work? I will send them to a Chick-fil-A event, and then watch them go. I think you got a mystery plot there. So yes, that would be actionable.
So there's there's one thing, and then I at one point got told I just couldn't use all my vacation one year because they didn't have time for me to do it, and I just took it. I didn't get all my vacation that year. So pretty much anything I was told to do, I did, even if it was illegal. At some point, it snapped. I wound up arguing over group emails with people who are much higher up in the company than me. And I wound up just being really, really hyper aggressive and basically all the time. And down to where I broke up with a client 2 or 3 years ago that I now work with and I have a great relationship with, and just popped off and got angry and just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm walking away. And I found that a couple times where I was very close and just figured, well, I'll work with this client as as an entrepreneur, business owner, whatever you want to call me. I'll work with them for another month or whatever. I'll get one more paycheck. And then actually it wound up being okay. As to where I saw the situation as irreparable, or I was too angry to ever work in this situation again. So
you know what? We gotta let's do 3 things, because I think everybody can relate to what you just said, no matter which of those options you are in change. 3 things to respond to that. Since you said, I don't have a lot to say on this. No, but you got a lot to say on this. The first thing is, to go back to politics, don't hash stuff out in group text unless you plan to quit. Or group text or group email. Being aggressive in a group email is a great way. You only do that. That would be the atomic bomb of politics. And there are times when you're like, okay, I don't care what we blow up because this is wrong. And I'm not saying that you were wrong in that. I'm saying that once you go group, you have now escalated it, which everyone is now saying, wow, we cannot put this back in the box. We cannot work this out. Whatever we do has to be worked out in front of everybody. And almost always that means somebody has to leave to restore the group to homeostasis. And so people will say to me, what's going on here is wrong. Yes. Do you want to stay here? Yes. And I want our senior management to deal with it. I'm going to go over my boss's head. Are you prepared to leave? No. Then don't do it. Well, it's wrong. Well, then you got to go over your boss to their boss. Yes. Great. Are you ready to leave? No. So you want to go over the chain of command and have nothing happen to you. Right. I don't know how to advise you in that. It probably won't happen, but you need to be ready. Once you bring it out of the chain of command and bring it to a group, you got to be ready for something to happen. Secondly, what you just illustrated is whatever you do that a lot of times people who have been passive, either they're avoiding or they're accommodating, or even if they're compromising, once a line has been crossed, and if you've got a sturdy battler who is a bit on the narcissistic or even sociopathic level, they with no self-awareness, you give them an inch, they take a mile. You give them another inch, they step over the line of good manners. You give them another inch, they begin to do things that are probably objectionable. You give them another inch, they do things that are unethical. You give them another inch, they do things that are illegal. And we literally train them like an out-of-control dog to bite us. And so often what happens is a person gets to that point and goes, okay, now that this is actionable, now that I could sue you for this, I am now really, really angry, and I have righteous anger. You have screwed me for the last time. And now that if I bring this to people who are above you, it is obvious you're wrong. I'm really, really angry, but I feel safe to be angry. And actually, we're way too angry to do it logically or rationally. So the minute you are smoking with righteousness The minute where you have righteous anger, I am right and you are wrong, is when you should get your emotions under control. How many people do you know who have been arguing politics on Twitter? Or I only say that because now that the president uses that as his forum, Twitter is the primary source of political debate in our country, which means that's even beautiful, isn't it? We're all having conflict over critical issues in 140 characters or less. So just shoot us all in collective uncivility. But anyway, how many people have you seen do this when they're angry? But they think they're right. You are morally ineptitude, moral ineptitude. You're a moral nincompoop. Actually, you're just a jerk. And so I have every right to talk to you as if you're that. It happens when we're not only emotional, but when we've let it, when it's pushed us to where we're smoking with self-justification, and even when we're right. And then lastly, everybody, unless you're driving, and then just keep one hand on the wheel, take 3 fingers, put it above your forehead. That's really neurologically how much we have to think with. Everything else in our brain. I know this is oversimplification if you got a PhD in neuroscience, but for the most part, that's what we got to work with in, the thinking part of our brain, the rational part of our brain. Everything else is running your digestion and your breathing. And fight or flight, when the back of our brain lights up, the part that is most attached to fight or flight in our spinal column, we got to calm this before anything gets to here. If you don't calm this down, don't get into a conflict, because as Seth illustrated, you're going to do things and say things, especially when we're right. Isn't that ironic that when we're right, we're worse at conflict than when we don't feel completely justified? And we used to do dumb things. I know from my own marriage that when I was sure I was right, I could be rather condescending. When I was afraid she was right, I would often fight harder. But when I was afraid she was right, I would be much more willing to go, fine, I'm just too angry. Because I realized, I could very well be wrong here. And once I got over the last-ditch effort of trying to fight harder, I could be reasonable. But when I was sure I was right, I could be really condescending. Well, baby, now that I understand that more, and she'd be like, okay, don't give me that. I'm going to lecture you, look, or I will cut you from here to here. And death threats are not what you need in your own marriage.
Okay, so piece number 1 here is, if you're upset, if you're hot, you just got to walk away. I would say one of the reasons I've done it wrong all the way around, probably the biggest shortcoming in my career, period, is how I've handled conflict, right? Eventually, I've gotten to the place with
It's the biggest shortcoming of most people's career, but keep going.
Okay, fair enough.
Eventually, you got to the place. I interrupted.
Eventually, I've gotten to the place where I just couldn't even be around somebody without it being tense.
Often sturdy battlers have to move away from the person, and they create like a wall that goes, okay, the way I'm going to handle this situation without homicide is to avoid the constant homicidal fantasies I have when I'm around you. And so I won't act on those homicidal fantasies if I avoid you. So often people who are sturdy battlers, who are more aggressive in conflict, they'll hit the point where they're like, all right, I just need to stay away from this person.
Yeah. Okay, that causes a problem. I mean, nonprofit, corporation, family business, any weird hybrid of those things. I mean, if people can't talk to each other, are we kind of back to somebody's going to leave? Or is there a way for it to get better? No. Anybody who's in a family business right now is like, oh, heavens, we have cousins who avoid each other. That's how we make this thing work. They're family. You can't get rid of family. You can't fire them. You would be so fired if we could. But we cope with it by not talking to each other, by talking about each other, by sending over diplomatic corps. And it's not that different than negotiations politically around nuclear proliferation. We will send diplomats over. Lower level people will work this out because the family members have too much emotion to, and the family members can't get rid of each other.
we would love to blow you up, but we don't know how to do that without taking your entire country out. And therefore, we're going to have to live with the fact that we think you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And so, yeah, getting away from each other is a frequent strategy. It's one of the reasons why there's a wall between Palestine and Israel. You blowing up our discotheque and us bombing you, shooting you up again, that's awkward. And so let's put up a wall. And it's not foolproof, but it dramatically reduces the amount of time that people die.
Okay. The people die.
And isn't that one of the sub goals of this show? How to grow your business, how to, and then how to not kill people
along the way. But legit. Okay, I'm just thinking back to, and I think I said probably during the politics episode, as I've kind of woven my way in and out of former employers, doing different projects and stuff for people I used to work for, I found that if I had 2 or 3 years away from somebody that I couldn't stand, that we were super cool with each other. But I don't know if I went back into that, into that full-time job, if we would pick up right where we left off, because the things we didn't like about each other would bother us. Right.
Yeah. Often that's the case. Hey, by the way, it's one of the reasons why it almost never works to hire a friend. People can be great friends if they meet at work. They almost never remain friends if they start a business together or if they hire somebody and then you work with a friend, because they have family dynamics that way. And you could, if you met somebody at work you don't like, realize it's just best for us to meet up and say hello. But when we're in this role again, we're too tied together. Just don't. You would have to negotiate the things that busted stuff up before to have a real fighting chance that's going to change, or realize that I'm in a different place in life now and stuff doesn't bother me that used to. And this, your irritations are some of the things that didn't bother me. I remember a woman saying to me once when I was teaching a workshop, she goes, I knew after 7 years, it was probably time to marry him. Once we got engaged, we got married in 3 months because we were friends for 7 years. And when I started thinking that his irritations were idiosyncrasies and that they were cute, I knew I could marry him.
Okay.
We just get to the place where we're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. We're doing kind of a short episode here, so let's go out on the last 5 minutes on these two things. Conflict within, conflict up and then conflict down. Because these are kind of like conflict like side by side, right? Like what you do. Conflict, you got a manager who's crazy and yells at you, and conflict, you got an employee who's just smashing things as they go.
Yeah, if you got a manager who's crazy and is smashing things as they go, then you got to decide how quickly you're going to leave.
That was easy.
Yeah. If the rich people that were surveyed and asked, how do you see the economy? And they predict a recession in less than a year. Now that we've got a lot of, now that we're in a trade war, and nothing scares wealthy people more than a trade war. And as much as people would think, oh, well, this is good, it protects our economy, that's usually not what happens. Anyway, now that people are saying, hey, we're moving into a recession, and we get into a recession and you're like, I got 3 kids and 1 on the way. And you know what? I'm going to move into an accommodating or even an avoiding role, just kind of roll up in a ball and live with it. But when I can get my ducks in a row, here's where I'm going to leave. That's how people survive stuff like that. We truly get homicidal when we feel like there's no place to go and you're a jerk. We're back to smoking with righteousness. You're an evil, jerk, sociopathic, narcissistic manager, and you must die because I have no choice but to live with you. That's when people are absolutely crazy, and then they justify it later. Your Honor, but he was evil. I had to step in. Satan was speaking through him.
Okay.
then there's the local news next to your building going, but he seems so sane. I never would have seen it coming from Hayden.
As far as employees, the pushback that are really combative.
If they're really combative, all right, here's the best advice that was given me when I had to deal with a combative person. And for me, for you, it's kind of idiot people. For me, it is passive-aggressive people that are my kryptonite. I can handle about everybody but passive-aggressive folks. And this was a sturdy battler who was passive-aggressive. He would snarl in meetings and then agree to things and then never plan to do them. And I said to my mentor, I said, okay, he needs to be fired. And he said, no, he really doesn't. You just need to find out what dynamics he had with his father. You need to see if that's what he applies to every male authority figure. Sure enough, he did. And you know what? He's just never been supervised well. He shed supervision by acting like that. And you need to be the supervisor that actually asks him to be supervised and see if he can grow up. And I was like, no, he must die. And he said, I think you've got a personality conflict. I think that you just don't like working with passive aggressive people. I said, what gives you that? So,
if you're on the audio only, his head is moving.
Deal with your twitch, and then call his bluff and refuse to let your issues get in the way of giving him good supervision. And I found it hard to do because that's my kryptonite. But, once I just buckled down and realized what was going on and, learned about his dad and went, oh, yeah, he was incredibly sneaky and passive aggressive with his dad. He let his brother was not very sneaky, so his brother was in trouble all the time. He did exactly what his brother did, but he was smart enough to be sneaky, and his dad thought he was wonderful. So he dealt with authority figures by being completely passive aggressive and only snarling at them when he got called out on stuff. And I was like, oh, he was so right. Bottom line is, figure out if you're the one with the issue. And the only way to do that is to ask somebody else. Am I the only one with the issue? And if you figure out it's your issue, go deal with it first. Give that person a chance. And then rain down hell upon them.